I'm Matt, and for 17 years, I thought I had a solid marriage with my wife, Lisa. We had two great kids, a 14-year-old son and a 16-year-old daughter. Life seemed good. I loved my family and my job as a mechanical engineer, and Lisa was doing well as an accountant. We both kept ourselves fit, and I thought we had a great partnership. Our daughter, Madison, and I shared a special bond. She was a daddy's girl through and through, and she looked up to me in a way that always filled me with pride. She was a math and science whiz, and she dreamed of becoming an engineer, just like me. When she got her driver's license, she'd tag along with me to car shows and even help me work on my collection of classic GM cars. Together, we tackled all sorts of projects around the house, basic plumbing, electrical work, you name it. If she had girl-related questions, she'd go to Lisa, but for everything else, school issues, friends, even boy problems, she'd come straight to me. Our son, Ryan, was a different story. He wasn't into cars, preferring literature and civics, with dreams of becoming a lawyer. He was closer to his mom, which I didn't mind. It was a nice balance. Lately, though, Lisa had seemed distant, like her mind was elsewhere. I'd ask if she was okay, but she always brushed it off. One Friday evening, I got home around 6, expecting the usual routine. The house felt empty, though, no welcoming dinner smells, no Madison to greet me. I figured she and Ryan were out with friends. I went upstairs to change and noticed Lisa had laid out a little black dress on the bed, along with heels and some, well, revealing lingerie. It looked like she was planning a night out, though she hadn't mentioned anything to me. Lisa was still in the bathroom, putting on makeup. "Where are we going, sweetheart?" I asked, loosening my tie. "We're not going anywhere," she replied, matter-of-factly. "Then why the dress and everything?" I asked, glancing at the bed. "I'm going out tonight," she said. I felt a pang of confusion. "Really? Where, exactly, are you going to dress like that? And without me? Where are the kids?" "The kids are with friends. I have a date tonight, and I'll probably be home in the morning," she said, almost casually. "A date?" I stammered, disbelief settling in. "And you think I'm just going to be okay with that? If you want to cheat, you can wait until we're divorced." "There's not going to be a divorce, Matt," she said with a sigh. "I just need this one night, okay? I need to prove to myself that I'm still desirable. If you really love me, you'd understand that. If you love me, you wouldn't even think of doing this," I shot back. She sighed, almost as if she was tired of explaining it to me. "I do love you, but I need to feel attractive. I'm getting older, and Steven, he's 10 years younger, has been flirting with me for months. I accepted his offer, just this one time." "Are you kidding me?" I said, barely keeping my voice steady. "After 17 years, you think you can just throw it all away for one night with some guy?" She laughed lightly, like I was overreacting. "It's just one night. I'll come back, and things will go back to the way they were. If you try to divorce me, though, I'll fight for everything, the house, the assets, custody. I'll make the kids hate you if I have to." I stared at her, a mix of anger and heartbreak welling up inside. "So you say you love me, but you're willing to do all that?" "Yes, I love you," she said, unblinking. "But I need this, and if you try to stop me, I'll make it hard on you. Once it's over, we'll be fine. And what's to stop you from doing this again a few years down the line?" I challenged myself. "Once you feel old again?" She shrugged. "It's just one night, Matt. Nothing's going to change. I might even learn something to make our love life better. If you walk out that door, we're done. Think about what you're risking here," I said, making one last attempt. "Stop being dramatic," she replied. She glanced in the mirror, grabbed her clutch, and headed downstairs. Moments later, I heard a car horn outside. Without looking back, she walked toward the door. "One last time, Lisa," I said, my voice thick. "If you walk out, that's it." She turned to me with a pitying smile. "Nothing's ending. I'll be back in the morning, and we'll be fine." With that, she stepped outside, leaving me standing there, stunned. As the door closed, I felt the life we'd built slipping away. I collapsed onto the couch, emotions crashing over me. We'd been together for so long, 20 years if you count the engagement and the years of dating. I'd never seen this coming. We had a decent love life, no major fights, and I always thought we resolved our issues. After some time, it hit me that she wasn't coming back that night. So, I decided to move forward, knowing things would never be the same. Our house was large, 4 bedrooms, with the master, Madison's room, Ryan's room, and a guest room with its own bath. I moved into what would now be my temporary bedroom. It took me a couple of hours to gather my things and move out of what used to be our shared bedroom. Given that we lived in a no-fault divorce state, I already knew that this situation wasn't going to favor me. Divorce laws here are stacked against men. They tend to hand over the house, the kids, child support, and alimony to the wife, leaving the husband with the bills and a much slimmer future. After setting up my new room, I went to my home office to start managing our finances. I had a personal account that I used for buying Lisa gifts, so I transferred half of our joint checking and savings into it. I also paid off and canceled all our credit cards, then applied for new ones in my name. On Monday, I plan to redirect my direct deposits to this account and look into splitting up our investments. That night, I poured myself a glass of James Beam, but sleep didn't come easily. The bed felt empty, and my mind kept racing with regrets and what-ifs. Should I have done something to stop her? Should I have tracked down that guy and confronted him? Eventually, after a restless night, dawn broke. I got up, showered, threw on jeans and a t-shirt, and had breakfast alone. At around 9 in the morning, Lisa waltzed back into the house as if nothing had happened. "Good morning, honey." "I'm home, just like I promised," she chirped with a bright smile. I didn't respond. Overnight, I'd come to realize I didn't deserve this level of disrespect. Trying to stop her last night would have only delayed the inevitable. She'd have just tried again. My love for her was quickly morphing into something darker, fueled by her dismissiveness, her threats, and her condescension. She called out, "Honey, where are you? I even tidied up before coming home, just for you." Then, spotting me in my office, she beamed, "Oh, there you are. I'm back, and now everything can go back to normal." She came over, arms wide, leaning in for a kiss. I pushed her back, my words cutting like steel. "Keep your lips off me. Who knows what they've been touching or where they've been?" Her eyes went wide with shock. I'd never spoken to her like that. Before she could say a word, I continued, "You need to get a full STD test and show me a notarized, clean report before you even think of touching me again. And as for intimacy, I wouldn't go near you even with a 10-foot pole." Her shock shifted to anger. "You're still nursing that bruised ego? I'm going to our room for a nap. I had a long night. Hopefully, you'll be over this attitude by the time I wake up, and we can talk like adults." She spun on her heel and stormed off. I smirked, knowing she'd be back soon. Not 5 minutes later, I heard her stomping back down the hallway. "What the hell did you do?" she shrieked. "Where are your clothes? Your toiletries? What's going on?" Calmly, I replied, "I'm not sure what you mean. Everything is exactly where it's supposed to be." "No, it's not. I just checked. Your closet is empty, your drawers are empty." "Maybe you're confused," I said, my tone even. "If you think of that room as our bedroom, that's your mistake. My things are in my new room now." Her face darkened. "We'll talk about this later. I'll give you a week to get over this tantrum, then I expect everything to go back to normal." "Not until I see that notarized report," I replied, turning back to my computer. I stayed in my office for most of the day. By afternoon, the kids came home, and I wondered how long it'd take for them to pick up on the tension. Meanwhile, I found a few promising apartments and set up viewings for Tuesday. I printed out our financial statements to prepare for my lawyer meeting on Monday. I knew I'd likely lose a lot in the divorce, but I planned to be ready. Around dinner time, Madison poked her head into my office. "Dad, dinner's ready." "Thanks, sweetheart," I replied. When I entered the kitchen, Lisa was smiling brightly, dressed up and made up, clearly attempting to kill me with kindness. She handed me a glass of wine and leaned in, but I stepped back, poured the wine down the sink, and set the glass on the counter. Then, I poured myself another shot of James Beam. The kids, seated at the table, definitely noticed the tension. I joined them, ignoring Lisa's forced cheerfulness. Dinner was strained. I tried to keep the conversation light for the kids, but there was no ignoring the tension in the air. I didn't touch my plate, though Lisa had cooked all my favorite dishes. I just sipped my drink and chatted with Madison and Ryan. "Dad, aren't you going to eat?" Ryan asked. Nope, not hungry, I replied. After that awkward meal, I refilled my drink and returned to my office without helping clear the table. Half an hour later, I shut down my computer, grabbed my truck keys, and drove to a quiet restaurant to have dinner. I even stopped by a bar afterward for a couple of drinks, not returning home until late. Seeing her light on, I made sure to close my door loudly, locked it, and propped a chair under the knob. She tried the door and knocked, but I ignored her. The next morning, I got up early, deciding that it was going to be a full day of football. With 3 games on, I planned to stay glued to the screen, ignoring all the weekend chores. After nearly finishing a pot of coffee, I started making omelets. Madison wandered in just as I was plating mine. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, "want an omelet?" "Sure, Dad." "Thanks," she replied, grabbing a glass of juice and settling at the table. After Madison finished her breakfast, Ryan came into the kitchen, and I promised to make his omelet next. Just as I was serving it up, Lisa entered, reaching for a coffee cup with a glare when she found the pot empty. "You couldn't leave me a cup?" she asked. "The pot's right there," I replied. "You know how to make it." She scoffed. "So, you're making omelets?" "Already finished." "Feel free to make yourself one," I said, slipping Ryan's omelet onto his plate. I'd used the last of the ingredients, put everything away, and left the kitchen. Around noon, I was in the living room, focused on the game, when Lisa came in with a plate and a beer. "I brought you lunch and a beer so you wouldn't miss anything," she said, all smiles. Without a word, I swept both off the table with my foot, watching her shocked expression as I walked to the kitchen for another beer. I left the mess for her to clean up. I didn't care about any stains. I wouldn't be living here much longer. "We need to discuss this," she began. "Shut up, the game's on," I said, eyes still glued to the screen. "For God's sake, the kids have noticed." "You need to fix this attitude," she snapped. "They'll notice when I move out," I replied. "You're not moving out, and there will be no divorce," she declared, storming off. Later, during halftime, Madison and Ryan approached me, clearly worried. "Dad, what's going on with you and Mom?" Madison asked. "You may as well know. Your mother and I are getting a divorce," I explained. "This has nothing to do with you, we both love you. This is between us." "But why?" Ryan asked, confused. "Because your mother did something I can't accept." Even when I told her how I felt, she wasn't sorry, I replied. Madison looked uncomfortable. "You mean her date on Friday night?" I was caught off guard. "You know about that?" "Yeah, Mom told us you weren't happy about it," she replied. "So, you know she cheated on me," I stated, watching their reactions. "No, she didn't cheat," Madison said. "She told you beforehand. It was only one night after 20 years. If you really loved her, you'd let her have that night and move on. The lack of understanding hurts." "Really?" "If she truly loved me, she wouldn't even consider being with another man," I said. "Dad, it was just one time." "She promised it wouldn't happen again," Madison insisted. "Let's talk about promises," I replied. 17 years ago, she vowed before God, our families, and friends to be faithful for life. Why should I trust any promise now? "But you also vowed to stick with her in good and bad times," Ryan pointed out. "True, but her breaking her vow releases me from mine," I replied. Madison frowned. "Why break up the family over one night? Why am I blamed for her actions?" "She broke the vows, not me," I replied firmly. "Mom wants to move on and put this behind us." "You're the one making a big deal out of it," Madison argued. By now, it was clear they weren't listening. Lisa had convinced them that Mommy needed this and that Daddy's ego was causing the problem. Frustrated, they eventually left, and I finished watching the game in peace. Later, I smelled dinner cooking, but I ignored it. When Ryan came to tell me dinner was ready, I grabbed my keys. "Where are you going?" "Dinner's ready," he asked. "I'm going to the sports bar to watch the game," I replied, cutting him off when he mentioned his mom had prepared a meal. After a burger and a few beers at the bar, I returned home late, made a point of closing my door loudly, locked it, and barricaded it. Lisa knocked, but I ignored her. Monday morning, I left early, calling my broker to set up a new investment account. I removed Lisa as a beneficiary on my retirement account and added Madison and Ryan. Then, I updated my direct deposit to my new bank account. When I told my boss about the divorce, he was supportive, understanding that I'd need time off for meetings and court dates. My lawyer confirmed my fears. I'd likely face a tough divorce, and custody would depend on the kids' preferences. Given our recent conversations, I wasn't hopeful. That evening, I went to a sports bar for Monday Night Football, ignoring Lisa's calls. Madison texted, frustrated with my silence, but I didn't respond. When I got home, everyone gave me an icy stare, so I went straight to my office and then to bed. Tuesday morning, I left early again, spent the afternoon looking at apartments, and found a nice 2-bedroom unit. I paid the deposit, planning to move in on Saturday, and picked up a couch, table, and chairs from a second-hand store to be delivered later. By the time I got home, they hadn't set a place for me at the table, and I snickered. I didn't plan to eat with them anyway. I made a huge sandwich, grabbed chips and a beer, and went to my office. "Dad, why are you being such a jerk?" Madison asked, coming in. "Because your mother disrespected me, broke my trust, and threw it in my face. I warned her about the consequences, and she went ahead anyway," I replied. "You can't just break up the family over that." "It was just one night," she argued. "One night, huh? Think about your future. Imagine being married, and your husband tells you he's going out with a younger, prettier woman for a night. How would you feel?" Madison paused, considering. "I wouldn't like it, but if he promised it was only once, I'd try to forgive him. If he told me beforehand, it wouldn't be cheating, right? Picture telling your husband, right after your vows, that you plan to sleep with another man. Imagine the devastation in his eyes," I said, turning back to my work. Wednesday evening, I came home to find both our parents in the living room. I realized I was walking into an ambush. "Matt," her father, Charles, began, "we're disappointed in Lisa, but you're overreacting. One mistake in 20 years doesn't justify tearing the family apart." "It wasn't just a mistake, it was premeditated," I shot back. "She ambushed me an hour before she left, giving me no chance to react. It was deliberate." "Son, she didn't cheat." "She told you first," my mother argued. "She didn't ask. Even when I objected, she didn't care. I told her what would happen if she went through with it," I said, feeling exasperated. "Matt," my dad interjected, "we understand your pain, but think of your family. Lisa loves you. Counseling could help." Stunned that my parents were siding with her, I couldn't take it anymore. I went to my room, closing the door behind me. 10 minutes later, I changed into jeans and boots, walked through the living room without a word, ignoring their pleas to talk, and drove to the sports bar for dinner and beers. I returned home to a quiet, dark house. The rest of the week continued similarly. I ignored Lisa, and the kids remained angry with me. Surprisingly, Lisa hadn't noticed the credit card cancellations yet, though I suspected she'd find out during her Saturday shopping. On Friday evening, Lisa came into my office wearing a revealing outfit, stockings, and heels. "The kids are out tonight. It's time for you to get over this and come back to bed," she demanded, voice tinged with desperation. "No thanks. I'm not touching you without proof you're disease-free," I replied coldly, not even glancing up. "Stop being ridiculous," she said, her voice filled with frustration. "I need you back." "Not interested," I replied, flipping another page in my book. "If you don't, I'll call Steven again," she threatened. "So much for it being a one-time thing, huh?" I replied sarcastically. "Damn it. It was, but if you keep rejecting me, you're pushing me back to someone else," she snapped. "Fine, have fun. Just let me know if you're bringing him here, so I can leave," I shot back. Half an hour later, I heard her car tires screech as she left. With the house empty, I packed up my things, disassembled the bed, and loaded everything into my truck, spending the night on the sofa in my office. The next morning, I picked up my apartment keys and moved in with help from my neighbors. When I returned to the house later, I packed up my office furniture and my recliner with the help of a neighbor's son. That evening, Madison called. "Dad, where are you?" she asked, sounding worried. "I'm at home, sweetheart," I replied calmly. "No, you're not. Your office is empty, the spare bedroom is empty, and your recliner's gone. Plus, your truck is missing." "You're right. I moved into an apartment. After the divorce, maybe I'll get another house," I said. "God, Dad. You're being such a jerk about this." "I thought you loved us," she accused, her voice breaking. "I do, sweetie, always," I assured her. But not enough to stay, she replied, sounding hurt. I'm not abandoning you. You can visit anytime, and I'll still take care of you and Ryan, I promised. You left us, and you're breaking up the family, she said, her voice trembling with anger. No, your mother did that. I told her what would happen if she went on that date, and she did it anyway. She thought you'd love her enough to get past it, she replied, her tone softening slightly. And I thought she loved me enough not to do it, I said, feeling the weight of it all. Fine, whatever, she replied before hanging up. The divorce process was a nightmare. Lisa fought every step, demanding counseling and alimony. I won the argument that she should cover counseling costs, but it was clear the counselor disliked me. After 12 sessions, even the counselor gave up. Lisa contested everything in the divorce, even small things like my poster and Bud Light lamp, just to make things harder for me and interfere with my time with the kids. In the end, the judge granted the divorce. I had to pay half the mortgage, child support of $2,000 per month, and $1,000 monthly in spousal support for 5 years, which would end if she remarried. Before the divorce was even finalized, she moved Stephen in, claiming half my paycheck each month. I cashed out some investments and bought a fixer-upper house, ready to start over. After moving into my new home, I poured my energy into repairs, spending my evenings and weekends fixing it up. Visitation with the kids became a nightmare. Lisa made it difficult, and the kids either seemed too busy or were openly hostile. Eventually, they told me they didn't want to see me anymore. Forcing the issue would have only bred resentment, so I backed off. I still sent them gifts, cards, and letters for birthdays and Christmas, but they were always returned unopened. I knew my checks were being cashed, but I never received a word of acknowledgement. Even when I informed them of their college funds, they responded dismissively. Lisa had turned them against me. To cope, I focused on my work in the house, saving money by skipping outings. One day, I called my mom to ask about Thanksgiving plans. Are you hosting this year? I asked. There was a brief pause before she replied, yes, but Lisa, her parents, and the kids are coming, and she's bringing her new man. We thought it might be too uncomfortable for you. Seriously, Mom? You're choosing my ex-wife and her boyfriend over me? I asked, feeling my frustration rise. We're just trying to keep a relationship with our grandchildren. This is on you, Matt. You should have done more to keep your family together, she said. Fine, how about Christmas Eve? We'll be at Lisa's on Christmas Day. Forget it. Consider me out of the family, I replied, ending the call. That Christmas Eve, I watched Die Hard alone, ignoring my mom's calls and texts, while the packages I'd sent to the kids came back, unopened as usual. 5 years later, I received a wedding announcement. Lisa had married Stephen the weekend after my last spousal maintenance payment. With Ryan turning 18, my child support had ended as well. To celebrate, I got drunk. It felt like I had poured everything into that family, only to be discarded. Now that my obligations were over, I resolved to move on as best as I could. Though one issue lingered, I was still responsible for half the mortgage, which would end when Ryan graduated, but my name was still on the deed. Lisa seemed to think the house was hers, but the divorce agreement had only granted her temporary residency until the kids finished high school. I was entitled to half the house's value. I reached out to my lawyer. When we divorced, the house was worth around $300,000, with $200,000 in equity. Now, it has appreciated to about $500,000, with $450,000 in equity. With only $50,000 left on the mortgage, I knew the value was substantial, and I wanted my share. Besides, Lisa loved that house, so claiming half would hit a nerve, and it would repay me for years of mortgage and maintenance contributions. A week later, Lisa called. Matt, what the hell is going on? Just working on my house. Surprised to hear from you. Why did a realtor show up with a listing contract? She demanded. Because both our names are on the deed, and she needs your signature for the sale. I'm not selling. I love this house, she yelled. Then when can I expect my check for half the equity? I got the house in the divorce. No, you got to live there until Ryan graduated. Now we either sell it and split the proceeds, or you can buy out my half. I'm not giving you $100,000 for a house that's rightfully mine, she fumed. Good thing I'm not asking for $100,000. The equity is now $450,000, so my half is $225,000. And with the furniture, let's round it to $250,000. You're insane. I'm not giving you a dime. She hung up in fury, and I laughed, satisfied. 2 months later, a judge ruled in my favor. Lisa was ordered to pay court fees, my legal costs, and the buyout, which came to $275,000 since the house had appraised even higher than expected. Stephen ended up funding most of it, a decision that would come back to haunt him. I used the money to complete the renovations on my house and build a shop. With the extra funds, I bought a 1972 Chevy pickup in rough shape, mainly for the chassis. I stripped it down, cleaned it, and repainted it. The rear differential was in decent shape, but I rebuilt it anyway. The transmission was a Borg-Warner T10, a manual 4-speed, and I decided to go all out with the engine, installing a 427 big block. I found one online, had it shipped, and tore it apart for machine work. After installing a forged crankshaft, 10:1 pistons, a heavy cam, and ported in polished heads, I added a blower, chrome valve covers, polished aluminum, and steel-braided hoses. My first test drive was intense. I floored it on the freeway, and the back tires lost traction instantly. Lesson learned, I applied the gas more carefully after that. A few weeks later, I entered a public car show for fun. I parked my 72 Chevy next to a 68 GTO owned by two redheads, a woman around my age and a teenager, presumably her daughter. No guy was with them, and I noted the older woman wasn't wearing a ring. "Good morning. I love your GTO," I said, breaking the ice. "Thanks. I like your truck too," she replied with a smile. "This is my first time showing it. I'm Matt." "I'm Joss, and this is my daughter, Jane. We've done a few shows before." We spent most of the day chatting with other car enthusiasts. While I didn't win any awards, I had a great time. Joss shared that she divorced her husband over cheating and used the GTO as leverage to secure child support. Jane seemed like a friendly kid, openly expressing frustration with her dad's infidelity. After the show, I invited them to dinner, and they accepted. As I shared my story, Joss and Jane were sympathetic, surprised that my kids had blamed me for the divorce despite Lisa's actions. "I'm so sorry, Matt. You seem like a nice guy who didn't deserve that," Joss said. We exchanged numbers, and Jane gave me a thumbs up and a wink, signaling her approval. Joss and I went out again the following weekend for dinner and dancing, where she gave me a kiss on the cheek, and Jane smiled and gave another thumbs up. A few dates later, I invited them over for lasagna, which they enjoyed despite Joss's joking that the house could use a woman's touch. The next weekend, they invited me to their apartment, where I couldn't stop eating Joss's amazing cooking, much to their amusement. 2 weekends later, during another dinner and dancing date, Joss leaned in during a slow song and whispered, "Take me home." I pulled back, surprised, but she giggled and clarified, "To your home." Luckily, I had my regular truck that night. Once we got back, we spent the night together, and I cooked her breakfast the next morning. A few months later, I proposed, and she said yes. We had a simple courthouse wedding, and Joss and Jane moved in with me. Jane even started calling me Daddy. Life felt full again, though it wasn't perfect. We had disagreements, and Jane and I butted heads occasionally. She was still a teenager, after all, and I was a father figure now. But she respected me, and Joss loved me as much as I loved her. About a year later, I got an unexpected call from an unknown number. "Hello?" I answered. "Dad," said an excited voice on the other end. "It's me, Madison. I have great news, I'm getting married." "It's good to hear from you, sweetheart." "I'm happy for you," I replied, surprised. "I want you to come to the wedding," she said, though she quickly added, "But Stephen is paying for everything and will walk me down the aisle. You wouldn't sit in the front pew, but I'd really like you there." "Stephen?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "You mean the man your mother cheated with?" "Yes, but look, Dad, I'm trying to reconnect here." "I want you there," she said, her voice softening. "I'm sorry, Madison, but I can't. Your mother's choices tore our family apart. You still think she did nothing wrong, but you're asking me to stand by while another man takes my place on your big day." "Fine," she snapped. "Don't expect to see your grandkids, then. If you're raising them to think like you do, maybe it's for the best," I replied calmly. "Mom was right, you're such a jerk," she shouted before hanging up. That was the last I heard from my daughter. She left me voicemails and texts, but I deleted them. Her olive branch was an insult. She'd made her choice years ago. The chance of rebuilding a relationship with her or Ryan was gone, and though it hurt, I couldn't ignore how they had sided with their mother from the beginning. Setting my phone aside, I got back to work on a '63 Chevy pickup, a more modest project with a 350 engine upgrade. I didn't notice that Jane had picked up my phone or that she was even home. Meanwhile, Madison's perspective had shifted. She was hurt that I hadn't invited her to my wedding, surprised to learn I'd remarried and even gained a new daughter in Jane. Memories flooded back. She recalled wanting to live with me initially but feeling pressured by her mother's claims that she only needed one night to feel young again. Jane's words had stung her, and she felt torn, reflecting on how things might have been different. Back home, Madison confided in her mother and grandmothers, who were disheartened that I wouldn't attend the wedding. I thought Dad would have gotten over his stubbornness by now, she said, recalling her efforts to reconcile with him. But her recent discovery that she had a stepsister came as an even bigger surprise. Apparently, Dad remarried and adopted a girl named Jane. She called me after Dad hung up and was incredibly rude, even going as far as to thank my mom for being stupid enough to let him go so she could have a great dad. Her family was taken aback. Matt got married, and we weren't invited? Grandma whispered, clearly shaken by the news. Finally, the day of Madison's wedding arrived. Although she felt a pang of sadness knowing her dad wouldn't be there, she brushed it off, determined to enjoy her big day. She had reached out, and he had rejected her. As she walked up the aisle with Stephen, surrounded by friends and family, she was overwhelmed with joy. Ryan was standing beside her groom, Alan, as a groomsman. Tears filled her eyes as she locked onto Alan's smile. When Stephen lifted her veil, kissed her cheek, and handed her to Alan, the minister asked, "Who gives this bride away?" And Stephen proudly responded, "Her mother and I do." Something felt off, but Madison pushed it aside as she gazed into Alan's eyes and began to repeat her vows. Then, when it came to the line, "forsaking all others," she hesitated, her mind filling with unexpected images of betrayal. She imagined Alan with someone else and the pain she'd feel if he ever betrayed her. Suddenly, she understood her father's hurt. The clarity was so sharp that she blurted out, "I understand now." Confused, Alan leaned forward. "What do you understand?" With newfound conviction, she answered, "Absolutely everything." Then, with a serious tone, she asked, "Alan, do you really love me?" "Of course, I love you." "Why are you asking?" Alan replied, his concern growing. "Because I can't marry you today, not until I make things right with my dad," she explained, her voice trembling slightly. "What's wrong, Madison?" he asked, his tone filled with worry. "I love you, and I will marry you," she assured him, "but not today. We need to fix things first." She turned to the guests and made an announcement. "I'm sorry, everyone, but I can't go through with this today. Please enjoy the reception, it's all paid for, thanks to Stephen." She grabbed Alan's hand, heading back down the aisle. Her mother and Stephen quickly stepped in front of her, blocking her exit. Stephen was furious, and her mother was bewildered. "Madison, what are you doing?" Lisa asked, her tone sharp. "I'm fixing a mistake I made years ago," Madison replied, her determination evident. "What mistake?" her mother asked, voice tinged with worry. "The mistake of blaming Dad for the divorce when it was your fault for cheating," Madison replied, her tone unyielding. Lisa's face hardened. "Madison, I am your mother, not some strumpet, and you will respect me," she snapped. "Respect? You cheated, Mom. How can I look up to you?" "I only realized it when I imagined hurting Alan the way you hurt Dad. He was a good role model, and you weren't," Madison said, her voice breaking with emotion. Lisa's demeanor softened. "I never meant to hurt anyone," she whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. "But you did. And now I have to make it right," Madison said firmly. "And it's not just Dad. I know about James Beam, the coach Rick, and the landscaper. I even have videos." Lisa's eyes darted to Stephen, who looked appalled. Turning to him, Madison added, "Stephen, you can rest assured she's been faithful to her hairdresser and pool boy, if that's any comfort." Stephen's face went white with shock, and Madison continued her exit with Alan. As they passed the videographer, she requested a copy of the footage and signed a release for it to be shared online. Once in the car, Alan asked, "Where are we going?" "West on 156, Madison replied, typing the address into the GPS. The drive took 2 hours, and she hoped Dad would be home. They didn't stop to change, she was on a mission. When I opened the door and saw bride and groom standing on my porch, I was speechless. Even more surprising, I recognized Madison. I knew today was her wedding day, so she should have been celebrating or on her honeymoon. "Daddy, can I talk to you?" she asked softly. Still stunned, I led them inside. Joss and Jane were sitting in the living room, equally surprised by our unexpected visitors. "Madison, this is my wife, Joss, and our daughter, Jane." "Jane, Joss, this is my daughter, Madison. Anne." "I don't know who the man with her is," I said, gesturing toward Alan. "Daddy, this is Alan Wesley, my fiancé," Madison introduced him. "Didn't you get married a few hours ago?" I asked, confused. I couldn't go through with it. "I realized I can't get married unless my dad walks me down the aisle," Madison explained. "I'm so sorry for blaming you all these years. You didn't deserve any of that. Can you forgive me?" I was taken aback but also incredibly moved. Madison had finally seen the truth. "Did something happen at the wedding? You're still in your dress, and Alan's in his tux." "We were halfway through the ceremony when I had a revelation," she said, handing me a CD. "Please watch this while we change into regular clothes." Joss took Madison to a bedroom to change, and I set up the video player in the living room. Once they were ready, we watched the video together. The ceremony began as expected, but then Madison stumbled during her vows, unable to continue. To my astonishment, she paused the wedding and confronted her mom, exposing her infidelities right there in front of everyone. Jane, sitting beside me, whispered, "She really did it." When the video ended, Madison explained, "I couldn't go through with it. I finally understood what forsaking all others meant. Mom dishonored you, and by getting married without you, I was dishonoring you too. My vows would be meaningless without you, the most honorable person I know, by my side. When I marry Alan, I need you to walk me down the aisle, not Mom or Stephen." Madison looked over at Jane with a smile. "And I need my little sister as a bridesmaid. You woke me up, Jane. How could I get married without you there?" I was overwhelmed. We talked for hours, catching up and working through years of misunderstandings. Unknown to me, Jane had reached out to Madison earlier, planting the seeds that led her here. When it got late, I offered Madison and Alan the guest room for the night. Madison ignored the countless calls from her mother and Stephen but stayed connected with friends. As the wedding reception went on, some guests took Madison up on her offer to enjoy the party on Stephen's dime. He tried to cancel everything, but it was too late, and he ended up sulking in a corner, drinking. Later, Ryan sent Madison a video of their mom trying to talk to Stephen, which ended with him angrily calling her a cheating strumpet. That relationship seemed over. Ryan also managed to cancel the flight and resort reservations for the honeymoon, though they still incurred a 20% cancellation fee. Since Madison and Alan had already arranged time off, they decided to stay with us for the week. It gave me a chance to reconnect with Madison and to get to know Alan, who turned out to be a solid guy with strong values. Though things were strained at first, largely because of the lies my ex and kids had told him, he warmed up to me after learning the truth and seeing my workshop. We set a new wedding date for the same venue, a year later. This time, I would proudly walk Madison down the aisle. Joss and Jane were involved in the planning, and Madison and Alan updated everyone in the wedding party, with the exception of Lisa and Stephen. Over the next few months, Madison and I rebuilt our relationship. I got to know Alan better as we attended car shows together, showing off Joss's GTO, my '72 Chevy truck, Alan's Challenger, and Jane's 1974 Firebird. Madison and Alan visited often, and even Ryan stopped by occasionally. While it was harder to reconnect with him, he was closer to his mother. We made some progress. Meanwhile, things didn't go well for Lisa and Stephen. Stephen eventually moved out and filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences to avoid conflict and the harsh penalties of his prenup. Since the prenup protected his pre-marriage assets, Lisa only walked away with the house and about $50,000. Stephen couldn't prove he had used his own money to buy my share of the house, so with his name off the title, he ended up paying off a business loan with nothing to show for it. He couldn't refile under infidelity grounds in time, so Lisa walked away with a fraction of what she'd hoped for. Word of Lisa's affairs spread, tarnishing her reputation in the community. Her social standing took a dive as friends distanced themselves, and her invitations to parties, charity events, and other gatherings dried up. Financially, she struggled, relying solely on Stephen's money, which quickly ran out. Stephen learned an expensive lesson, losing thousands on the buyout of my half of the house, another $28,000 on the failed wedding, and $50,000 in the divorce. He became somewhat of a recluse, embarrassed by Lisa's gossip about his inadequacies, and eventually retreated to a quiet, solitary life. Years passed, and I watched Madison and Alan build a long, happy marriage. They had 3 wonderful kids, 2 boys and a girl, and lived a life rooted in honesty and love. Ryan eventually married a lovely girl, and they had 2 daughters of their own. As far as I know, neither of them ever cheated. They had learned from what they'd witnessed. Some thought I should have sought revenge on Lisa and Stephen, but there was nothing I could do without risking legal trouble or personal backlash. Instead, I focused on moving forward, building the best life I could. There's a saying, the best revenge is a life well lived, and I took it to heart. Karma, as they say, handled the rest, and I felt a sense of peace seeing how life had settled. I had Joss, my daughter Jane, and now my other children back in my life, all of us surrounded by love and trust. I was finally at peace, surrounded by people who cherished me, leading a life I was proud of. Ready, Daddy? Jane asked. No father is ever truly ready to let go of his daughter, but I was honored to do it for her. As the music filled the church, I stepped forward with my left foot, proudly walking my daughter down the aisle. My wife sat in her place of honor in the front row, smiling brightly. I'd join her there after fulfilling this last cherished duty. Don't worry, Daddy, Jane whispered as she squeezed my hand. I'm going through with this today, and I'm doing it right the first time.